Welcome back to the Hazmat Files, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of hazardous materials, emergency response, and environmental remediation. I'm your host, Erica Fisher. Today, we're tackling one of the fastest growing and most complex threats in the field, lithium-ion battery fires. These batteries power everything from smartphones to electric vehicles, but when they fail, the consequences can be catastrophic. Before we jump in, a quick disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of TransCare or its sponsoring organizations. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal or professional advice. Joining me today are three experts who operate on the front lines of lithium-ion battery fire response and remediation. We have Lieutenant John Cassidy, a 29-year member of the Fire Department, City of New York, FDNY. He is assigned to the Hazardous Material Company 1 with 22 years' experience responding to hazmat incidents. Cassidy is an instructor at the FDNY's Hazmat Technician School. He holds an associate degree in biomedical engineering from SUNY Farmingdale and a bachelor's degree in nursing from SUNY Stony Brook with 16 years of clinical practice in emergency nursing. Representing GrayMar Environmental Services is Steve Sitton, the Director of Programs and Training. With nearly 20 years of experience, Steve leads GrayMar's incident response team, which specializes in tanker emergencies, lithium-ion battery and fentanyl incidents, drone operations, and swiftwater rescue. He's based in Reno, Nevada, and remains an active leader in field operations. And finally, we're joined by Sean Tuthill. He is the Director of Waste Management with over 20 years of experience in the environmental waste industry. He began his career as a lab pack chemist where he advanced through roles in field operations, technical services, project management, and sales. In 2018, he joined AARCO Environmental to expand their waste management division and develop capabilities at the newly acquired New York State permitted industrial disposal facility. Sean collaborates with a broad range of clients, including public utilities, specialized manufacturers, engineers, and consultants. Together, we'll unpack the risks, response strategies, and long-term impacts of these volatile fires. Let's get started. To begin, let's set the stage. Lithium-ion batteries are everywhere. John, could you provide a quick explanation of what lithium-ion batteries are and aren't, and which types you've had the most experience responding to?
Good afternoon. So, lithium-ion batteries are the current state-of-the-art technology for portable batteries that are used in everything from consumer electronics, electric vehicles, up to grid-scale energy storage. The combination of being lightweight and energy-dense make them attractive for all those sectors. In the city of New York, the consumer electronics, especially in the micromobility sector, are what we respond to the most.
Thanks, John. That was a great breakdown. Now that we understand what lithium-ion batteries are and where they show up in our lives, let's talk about the flip side. These batteries power so much of our world, but when something goes wrong, the consequences can be serious. What makes them so dangerous when they fail?
What is very unique about these batteries is that the fires that they produce, the fire growth is so much faster than a traditional room and contents fire. Our friends over at ULFSRI have done research that has shown that the battery failure to room flashover is happening in under a minute. This is leading to advanced fire upon arrival, people being trapped, much higher costs as far as life safety and environmental damage. So it is really a game changer in the fireground environment.
And Steve or Sean, anything else you've experienced on how it makes these such dangerous consequences when they go wrong?
From the contractor perspective, at least from what we've dealt with, again, going back to what John was talking about, they hold huge amounts of energy compared to your typical batteries, especially when it comes to EVs and BESS systems. Those are battery energy storage systems, which is a lot of the responses that we're getting calls for.
I think the only other thing I'd like to add is with these batteries, because they've become such a ordinary household item for everyone, that there's a certain extent of being disarmed because people see them every day and don't understand some of the hazards that are associated with using them and charging them properly and keeping an eye on them when they're around your house.
Erica, if I could add, one of the things that also is a relatively new phenomenon with these batteries, or observed phenomenon with these batteries, is that we're seeing deflagrations, meaning that we're having vapor cloud explosions inside the structure, which is failing the windows. And now also having fully vented fire is a very different fire environment today.
Building on that, based on your field experience, what are the most common scenarios that lead to lithium-ion battery fires in urban environments?
In New York City, it revolutionized segments of the market. We have over 65,000 delivery workers in New York City that rely on this technology. So that really supercharged that segment. You get a lot more deliveries done in a delivery day, which increases the revenue for the delivery workers. So it really is a beneficial technology. Also, we're seeing in dense urban environments, it highlights transportation for a lot of people that might not necessarily could afford a car or a place to park. So the duality of this is, even though we have some safety challenges to work through, it really does improve the lives of many people.
The most common scenarios that I'm seeing out there, or my team's seeing, is related to highway wrecks or mishandling. So forklifts loading solar panel batteries or car batteries and then puncturing them. Usually it's some kind of assault on the battery itself, either via wreck or mishandling.
And zooming in on New York City, John, how does the FDNY assess and mitigate risks in buildings or facilities that store or utilize large quantities of these batteries?
So New York City has really taken an all-of-government approach to address this, and it is required when we look at that this is revolutionizing many segments of the economy, from transportation to energy storage. So we start out with fire prevention. We have fire prevention inspectors, and they go out into the marketplace and they inspect buildings that store these batteries. They sell them. They've done research on what types we're seeing. We've done a lot of things like legislation that requires that you can't repair these batteries. They have to be OEM. You have to sell UL certified equipment in the city of New York. Fire prevention goes out and actually does an education and an enforcement action, which is important, as well as working with the applicable standards to try and help people come up with solutions on storing. And one of the things that's a challenge for government is the technology has gotten ahead of the regulations and the fire codes. And we're trying to work with everybody to try and find the best solutions until the codes and the standards catch up.
And from the environmental contractor side, Steve, what proactive steps can businesses take to reduce the likelihood of battery-related incidents? And Sean, feel free to add your perspective here as well.
One of the things is taking inventory, knowing how many batteries you have, where they're at. Not rushing is a huge one. Again, from my perspective, where we're responding is roadside. Usually it's a wreck, they're speeding and or not paying attention while driving. And then going back to forklift scenarios, lots of punctures when they're being loaded into Connex boxes and things of that nature.
From my side of the house, we see a lot of batteries in manufacturing plants, pharmaceutical companies. Everyone's using hand tools that now are not corded. So they have lithium-ion batteries. Some of the advice that we suggest is having more lithium-ion batteries to come in and out of those tools so that at the end of the shift, you don't have to plug that battery in overnight when maybe there is no one working, no one keeping an eye on these batteries that are charging. And then also just proper container management and keeping employees aware of when batteries fault, when equipment's not working, to make sure that those batteries do not wind up back on a shelf or in a charger, and that they get properly labeled and containerized for disposal.
You've each given some great proactive steps that businesses and facilities can take. But if you each had to pinpoint one change that could make the biggest difference in reducing these incidents, what would it be? John, how about you start?
So in New York, if we look at it, it would be buying the highest quality equipment. The majority of the incidents that we see are low cost, imported, non-UL certified devices, have a much higher failure rate. If we look at certified equipment, while it's not impossible for those to fail, just statistically, the numbers are like exponential. It's the cheaper stuff on the market. So buying certified equipment is the place to start.
And Sean, what do you think would be one of the biggest changes that could be made?
I agree with John because we see the aftermath of picking up these burnt batteries, and I would say 90% of the batteries that we see that are damaged or burnt are batteries that are not certified, no UL stamps, homemade, people building their own battery packs for e-mobility devices. So I would stick with John's advice of trying to stay within the realm of using certified batteries.
And Steve, do you have any changes that you would pinpoint to help reduce the likelihood of these incidents?
From my perspective, being on the transportation side, dealing with roadside wrecks for the majority of it, one thing that I've noticed is when these BESS units started getting shipped, they are using mom and pop shops. And like they said, with the smaller batteries, low cost providers, and they tend to be the ones that are wrecking. And when they are wrecking and we're responding, we're noticing that not a lot of people are aware that they're actually shipping them through their city in the quantity that they are because they're putting them into the power system. So they're using these BESS systems to store energy at low use cycles. And then when there's high use cycles, they're sending energy. And again, it's wreck related. They're wrecking while they're driving, speeding, not paying attention. So with a class 9, that might be something that we need to look at in the future and treating them as we're treating other hazmats with having dedicated routes. So that way we understand where these batteries are being shipped and maybe the quantity they're being shipped in so that we as responders can work together to have a game plan in place to be able to respond.
Erica, if I might add, that there's starting to have some discussion that there really should consider a class 10 placard specifically for batteries and really start to look at them as the hazard that they possibly can. And especially when we start talking about DDR batteries, right? It's very challenging for the transportation sector. And I think without having a special class 9, there's just so many things that fall under class 9 and they don't have the same hazard profile that batteries do.
These are all great suggestions and changes that could be implemented. And prevention also depends upon public awareness. John, you had already mentioned some of what FDNY does, but what role does public education play in reducing these fires, and how can messaging be improved?
Public messaging starts with data collection, having good data so that we can actually do targeted public education. In the city of New York, we actually have data maps and we can see where these fires are most likely to happen. And with that, we can do targeted outreach. In addition to social media, we'll actually go out into the communities and speak with them. We mentioned earlier that we have 65,000 delivery workers, and there are labor organizations that represent that community. And we've interacted directly with them and a lot of the app delivery makers like Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Grubhub to try and specifically get targeted messaging to them. Also, what we do from public messaging, if there is a significant incident like a fire with a fatality or significant property damage, we will revisit that issue with targeted Facebook, Instagram, social media feeds to feature that these incidents are happening and capitalize on the news cycle when they happen to get that message out again.
It's definitely clear that prevention's a shared responsibility and being aware is important. But when things go wrong, the response has to be swift and strategic. Let's talk about what happens when a lithium-ion battery fire breaks out. John, can you walk us through a typical FDNY hazmat response from dispatch to containment?
There's two types of ways that we find out about these fires. Sometimes they're just coming in as a regular fire call, and then batteries will be discovered after extinguishment. And then the units on scene will call for a hazmat response, which will help with packaging and safe disposal. And then there are other times where it'll come in that it is a mobility device fire through dispatch, and then you'll get a fire response and the hazmat response as well. So it depends on how the call type came in. In either scenario, when we get a battery fire, the hazmat group sends a hazmat battalion chief, a hazmat technician unit, which is ever closer, and that could be a squad company or a hazmat engine. And then you get the hazardous material company 1, which responds to all 5 boroughs of New York City. So we are fortunate to have robust resources to respond to these incidents.
Compared to traditional fires, what are the biggest challenges firefighters face when responding to lithium-ion battery incidents?
So lithium-ion batteries definitely pose a challenge of we need to dispose of them properly. And that's not something typically a firefighter thinks about. One of the things we also have to consider is they reignite. So that's certainly a challenge. Usually we don't have rekindles after typical suppression efforts have been put in place. But lithium-ion batteries, especially when we have larger quantities of them, if they're not safely removed from the premises, they can go on fire again. And the average fire company doesn't have the resources to package and dispose and the contracts to actually get them removed from the premises. And if we don't provide those services for the community, very often they're going to end up in an immiscible waste stream, and another incident is going to happen later on. So it is really important that government take an active role to try and relieve the homeowner of this additional challenge after the tragedy of a fire at their building.
And Sean and Steve, how do contractors coordinate with first responders during or following a lithium-ion battery incident?
We have interface with FDNY and New York City Department of Environmental Protection. For the aftermath, typically we're lucky enough that the city agencies do a pretty good job of packaging and prepping the material for us to pick up. Occasionally there are larger volumes where we'll be asked to package the either remaining batteries that are on site or repackage for a variety of different reasons. We're looking to make sure that the batteries are packaged in UN-rated, X-rated drums, which is a specific packaging guideline for batteries. It's the highest level of packaging that we use to transport hazardous waste and hazardous materials. And like John said, the unique part about the lithium-ion batteries is, especially when there's large chains of them strung together, is that it may look like the battery fire is extinguished, but that may not be the case. And when you put them back on the road, hitting potholes and bumps, it's imperative that they're packaged appropriately. And then it's also a challenge when we bring them to disposal facilities, because there are many disposal facilities that, just from a liability perspective, say, thanks, but no thanks. We're not going to accept lithium-ion batteries for recycling or for disposal. So that's been a challenge as well on our side.
We generally, as far as coordination goes, we're usually getting a phone call from the manufacturers because we have contracts with a lot of the manufacturers. We work in their processing facilities. So if there's an incident, they might contact us. We've been contacted by the Department of Transportations for that specific state because we hold contracts with them as emergency response contractors. We'll get the initial phone call from one of them. Then generally the fire department is the first responding party out there, even on a roadside incident. We'll download with them, make some phone calls to the state people, figure out how we need to get in, what access roads we need to take. And then once we get there, we'll download with Unified Command, figure out what the game plan is, what the response strategies may entail. The biggest thing for roadside with us, I always tell everyone, is if there's no danger to public, or fire into a forest or something, let it burn. Because the quicker it burns and eats itself, the quicker we can move it and get it out of there. The only time I recommend fire suppression, again, from my standpoint on a roadside when there's no people involved, would only be vapor suppression, just to keep it away from people. Other than that, I would generally always want them to let it burn so that we can just get it moved.
Erica, if I could add, because
Please.
Steve triggered a memory, one of the things that is a challenge for governments is there's a great deal of expense that's not really thought about. And there are a couple people that just are not aware of this. Damaged, defective, recalled batteries are a hazard class, and they have to be shipped and packaged and recycled properly. And there's a lot more expense than, say, solid waste management. And nobody's prepared for that. We have insurance companies that aren't aware of all the costs, and the policies that a lot of either homeowners or businesses may have in place aren't prepared to absorb these costs, and that leads to some pain points. And then governments don't necessarily have a special fund to cover those costs in that absence. And as we deal with the contractors and the homeowners and the business owners, it's a lot of trying to figure it out on the scene, and that leads to delays. It leads to batteries staying on scene a lot longer than necessary. It leads to attempts at cost cutting, which definitely can lead to problems in transportation, problems in disposal. So really a lot of work needs to be done on the front end so that when these incidents happen, that it should be relatively seamless. Like Steve might find that we have some tow operators that'll refuse to take an EV. And now what do? They're private business entities, and if they're not prepared, they don't want to assume the risk of having it go on fire on the back of their tow truck. So a lot more work needs to be done on the front end. And thankfully, discussions like this may trigger some people's minds. And hey, maybe we should sit down and start to talk of everybody in the whole supply chain of after they've gotten to the consumer till they get to their end of life or second life. We definitely need a lot more work to be put in there.
That's an excellent point, and definitely something that hopefully this type of conversation will spin off into in order to really follow and track the life cycle of the lithium-ion battery to protect not only the general public, but also first responders, and then ultimately allow manufacturers to understand when things go wrong, what those costs are left on either the end user or the consumer. Now, I want to get each of your inputs. What's one lesson you've learned in the field that you think everyone should know before they respond to a lithium-ion battery incident? Steve, how about you kick us off?
I would say a lot of these batteries, at least from the transportation side, whether it's an EV, a BESS, or just a larger unit, they have ERGs for them. So one thing that I've seen in responses is immediately assuming that it's a lithium fire when it's not. It's a brake fire on a trailer, and it doesn't impact the battery. And I've actually seen people load these EVs into bins and then want to fill them with salt water or a brine solution to try and dissipate energy later to find out that that battery was never even impacted. So the big thing is education, and the manufacturers have emergency numbers, and a lot of them are monitoring these. I've been on responses before where they knew it was on fire. I called them, I got a hold of them, and they were actually actively monitoring that unit because they had sensors inside of it. So manufacturers are a huge resource.
And Sean, how about you?
I'd say make sure you take your time. Don't jump the gun because, as Steve said before, I can see on a roadside just letting a lithium-ion battery burn could be the best policy. I'd say leave trying to extinguish these to the professionals, to fire agencies, if there is a thermal runaway. But if you do have the real estate and the space, I would say just let it burn and stay away from it. And then also after the fact, I know it's a devastating time and it's probably hard to focus through all the steps that need to be done in the aftermath, but making sure that they don't wind up back in municipal trash and making sure that they're handled properly and disposed of so that we don't see another YouTube video of a garbage truck on fire driving down the road.
And John, from your experience, what would be one lesson you've learned?
Well, I'm going to have to say I got to give you two. The first one is anytime you're anywhere near around a damaged, defective, recalled battery, post-fire battery, you must be utilizing all of your personal protective equipment, you must be using your self-contained breathing apparatus, because when they fail so quickly that you will not be able to get your mask on in time. And the toxic byproducts of these, and also being an inflammable gas cloud, is the risk versus reward is not there. Please wear your gear. It's of critical importance. And then the second is failure gas versus smoke. When lithium-ion batteries go, they don't always behave the same way. They don't always ignite right away. And you'll get this white vapor cloud that some people mistakenly call as smoke. And it's really predominantly hydrogen gas and carbon monoxide. These are potentially in an enclosed environment or a semi-enclosed environment and an explosive environment. And a firefighter typically looks at a white smoke, and if you're putting water on a structure fire, you have white smoke, it's a good thing. You got water on the fire, it's going to get better. But when you see a battery fire and you see this white vapor cloud that looks like smoke, that's an incredibly dangerous thing. And you could have ignition, but any sort of confinement, you can have an explosion that can hurt civilians or first responders.
And once the flames are out, the work is far from over. Let's shift to what happens next, the cleanup and environmental impacts. These fires leave behind more than just charred debris. Toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and comprised infrastructure all pose long-term risks, as well as the risk, as you guys have mentioned, of reigniting. Sean and Steve, what are the environmental hazards associated with the aftermath of a lithium-ion battery fire?
Just from my perspective, these batteries, they're a bunch of electrolytes, and one of the ones that I think just in the industry that we've always been concerned about is HF, hydrofluoric acid, which could be generated from extinguishing these batteries. HF is pretty nasty. It's well studied, causing dermal inhalation damage to folks. I think Steve will get more into the cleanup and restoration side, but it can be pretty complex. And I also don't blame homeowners that they're rightfully so being pretty terrified of trying to reoccupy the space after one of these incidents.
From a remediation or cleanup standpoint from us, generally it's going to be the same as any other kind of release, whether it was gasoline or diesel. There's going to be analytical taken, sampling being done to soil, any of the water that has been sprayed. If it was sprayed and collected, we're going to test that. From my general experience, most of the time this water goes as non-haz from the areas that we're collecting and testing. Certain states will not allow that. They would still call it haz based on what you're getting. But we're not finding a ton of constituents in there that pose a big threat. Most of the time we're scraping the top layer, again, pulling a third-party consultant in to verify testing, a state-approved one. That way we can remediate whatever the soil is and or water, damaged debris, whatever it is, and then we're going to restore it back to its original condition based on the property owner and or federal or state regulations.
And Sean and Steve, I know throughout the podcast, you both have talked a little bit about the challenges faced post-incident. What are some of the current challenges you face during cleanup and disposal?
Sometimes logistics comes to play because making sure that disposal facilities can accept these items in a quick turnaround scenario where people want to get them moved off site can be challenging because disposal facilities want to know what's coming. They want a fingerprint. They want a waste profile. So when you're selecting transporters and disposal companies, you want to make sure that the company's equipped to potentially be able to handle and store these over the road while those logistics are being worked out. Because sometimes you can't just leave these batteries on a street corner for days before they get picked up, moved, and disposed. One of the other challenges that we've run into is insurance companies. When they get involved, they will try sometimes to investigate what the cause of the fire was, and they'll want the batteries back where the battery has already left the scene. And that can be challenging because just from our perspective, we're trying to move these batteries and get them to the disposal facilities as quick as possible once they're moved offsite, because we really don't want them hanging around in our trucks. So that's a challenge too with insurers and explaining to them that there's certain timelines that we try to meet, and sometimes these batteries are already gone before they can do any forensic analysis on their end. there's a knowledge piece there. I'm sure that insurers are already working on new policies to cover exclusions and whatnot for lithium-ion batteries in insurance policies. So that's something that government agencies and insurers will probably have to work out.
Some challenges that we've seen, depending on the state or county or where you're at, is how quickly we can move these batteries. I've seen them where we've had to babysit them for a month or two on the side of a road. I've also been in states and counties where they let us transport them the next day to a recycling or an R&D facility that wanted to test them. Other challenges have been getting DOT and or EPA to approve the transportation method. Does it meet the DDR code at that point if it's already been consumed? How do you want to classify it? And basically what we've run into is they say, well, you classify it, you tell us. And then we go back to the manufacturer and say, based on what happened, based on what you saw and our results, how would you classify it? And they say, we don't want to classify it. So right now there's a lot of, nobody wants to own it. Everybody wants someone else to make the decision. And I think the sooner we can all come to an agreement, whether it was, like John said, a class 10 or something else, so we can get things moving faster, because an expense for a consumer or somebody purchasing one of those batteries, for a contractor to sit there and babysit it for 24 hours for a month is like astronomical in cost for them, versus another state saying, no, get it off my road and we'll escort you. And we've been successful with that as well, having fire departments escort us, and or we've brought in water trucks and had highway patrol and whatnot. Just depends on the area and what certain people are willing to do. And going back to the tow companies, some of them will take these EVs and or batteries. Others will say, we don't want to touch them. Or they'll say, hey, we'll do it, but we're only going to do it if the person responsible, the RP, signs a document stating if my truck burns up, you're going to pay for it. So again, there's some things I think logistically that we all need to come together and come up with a better strategy.
From today's discussion, I definitely take away that one of the key items that needs to be addressed across the board is addressing the classification issues, not only from a delivery to a consumer perspective, but during a response, and of course, the cleanup and remediation and disposal of that battery. Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear one final thought from each of you. If you could share one key message with the public, other first responders, or industry professionals about lithium-ion battery safety, what would it be? John, how about you kick us off?
So the FDNY's public safety messaging includes the following: buy high quality, certified equipment. If possible, store and charge outside. If they are inside, do not block your primary means of egress. Don't fight the fire. Get out of that space as quickly as possible, and then notify 911.
And Sean, how about you? What would your message be to responders or industry professionals?
I would say stay vigilant and be aware. Oftentimes I've seen folks that don't even know that these batteries are in their facilities or in their homes. I mean, I have kids and I'm constantly on them about their remote controlled cars and their scooters and things like that. The batteries are everywhere and they're not going away. So we need to educate the public about the hazards that are associated with these batteries.
And Steve, what would your message be?
I would say, from talking to the public, if they see something happening out there, the road shut down and there's some people standing around, these responders are game planning and trying to come up with the best response tactics possible, and it's changing very quickly. So just because something's not happening right that second doesn't mean that the first responders are not actively engaging, trying to get these put out, get these moved, and help people. And then for just in general, there's a huge negative outlook I see in the industry with lithium batteries. And I would just say that regardless if it's an EV that crashes into a rock at 70 miles an hour or it's a gasoline or diesel powered vehicle, you're going to have a fire and it's going to release toxic fumes. Lithium batteries have been around for a long time. They're just becoming more prevalent. They're becoming more powerful, but they're not this nasty technology that I feel some people make them out to be. They make everyone's lives easier. They're just different than gasoline and diesel, but each one poses its own set of hazards.
Like many things that we talk about on the podcast, these are products that are essential to our daily life, so they won't go anywhere, and we do need them. A huge thank you to our guests, John, Steve, and Sean, for sharing your expertise and experience from the field. Today's discussion has shed light on the double-edged nature of lithium-ion technology. While these batteries fuel our modern lives, they also introduce complex hazards that require thoughtful community engagement, response planning, cross-sector collaboration, and constant adaptation. If you found this episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe to the Hazmat Files on your favorite podcast streaming platform. Stay safe, stay ready, and we'll see you next time on the Hazmat Files.